Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Well, Jake, there were a ton of guys that were drafted, some studs in the NFL draft that are now on these Los Angeles Chargers. And you could argue there are already a bunch of studs. We've got guys like Kenneth Murray, Justin Herbert, Derwin James, Keenan Allen. We've also got some alumni, i.e. Dan Fouts, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees. It's probably time, now that this team is kind of on the rise, possibly looking at getting some memorabilia, maybe a signed helmet, a jersey, poster. Well, I know just the group to go to. Charger Bolt Family. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on Instagram. Incredible organization, partners with both the team as well as a lot of philanthropic folks to help the community as well as the team. But Jake, they are so incredible at getting some of the premier signings from players on this team. Let's talk about Justin Herbert, Derwin James, Keenan Allen, who have already had them. I have actually gotten a Keenan Allen signed poster. I've also got a Justin Herbert signed mini helmet. Raffles, they have giveaways. They have all kinds of things that you can do. But they also provide a great opportunity for you to get some of your favorite players and memorabilia that will last a lifetime. Go to Charger Bolt Family, talk to Ken, tell him Dan and Jake sent you from Chargers Unleashed. It's a great organization. You can get awesome stuff. A lot of roots. They're doing a ton of tailgating. They're actually going to have a huge presence this year at SoFi. Check them out, Charger Bolt Family. Tell Ken that we say hello. Highly recommend them. Check them out.
Welcome to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. Dan, it was the moment we all were waiting for. We came, we saw, we conquered 3 straight days of dedication, of imprints in the couch, of nothing but bad food that you should not be ingesting, and along with a couple alcohol beverages to go with it. 3 days of the NFL draft. What a 3 days it was. Dan, how are you feeling after the 3 days?
Well, Jake, that was a loaded question. I would say I'm feeling physically exhausted, a little fat. I definitely am feeling some of the libations that were had, although it was a tremendous time. Thank you again for the draft party. That was tremendous.
You are very welcome, sir.
But in terms of how I'm feeling for the Chargers, Jake! We got our guy, and not just one guy, 2 guys, not just 2 guys in the first 2 rounds, but we got guys that you and I both have been polling for months. We got pipe dream scenarios. We've got sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops. Somehow, all of Chargers fans, all of the Bolt fam, all of our prayers were answered on day 1, and then on day 2, and in my case, and I think for some others, even on day 3, and maybe they didn't even know it. Jake, I am feeling great about what just happened this weekend, and I would argue this is the best draft I can remember in totality that the Chargers have had.
I think it's really hard to beat this one. If you're just looking at the first 2 rounds specifically, it's very hard to beat. I said it numerous times on this show. I said it during our mock draft episode. I said it during our offensive tackle and our cornerback deep dive that the ultimate pipe dream was for the Chargers to get Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. 1 and 2. Hell, even if you just ended up getting one of those, would have been a win. But the likelihood as the draft was getting closer, as you're seeing some of the rankings taking place, as you're hearing from, some of the analyst talk as far as which teams have interest in who, it just seemed like there was no way that the Chargers were going to be able to do this unless they ended up making a trade up.
And Jake, you had talked about this several times where the nightmare scenario for you is the Chargers mortgage their future, trade a first or a second or future, whatever, and have to trade up for either one of these guys or arguably someone not as good as these guys.
Right.
Just because we were desperate. And the fact that we were able to take all of our picks without having to trade up for any of them is a miracle. Absolute miracle. So on this episode, Chargers fans, we are going to go through who the Chargers drafted on day 1, 2, and 3, how we feel about each one, and why the Chargers did it. And I want folks to just take a deep breath. And Jake, maybe both of us have listened to this beforehand because we needed to take a deep breath and just internalize what has transpired over the past, 3 days. The Chargers did a great job. There is no other way to put it. They did fantastic. And when we go through these scenarios of how each of these transpired, it actually feels like a miracle that the Chargers pulled off what happened with their first and second round picks. So, Jake, let's start with the miracle that was day 1.
With the 13th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Los Angeles Chargers select Rashawn Slater Jr., tackle, Northwestern.
The miracle that was day 1. There's so much that went into how the hell Rashawn Slater fell to us at 13.
Right?
I went back and I looked at every scenario that took place that allowed him to fall right in our laps. First off, we have to send a big thank you to the Cincinnati Bengals. Thank you for being unconventional. I know you got your guy in Jamar Chase, but thank you for being unconventional, and to where some people would say not the smartest decision, because if the Bengals go Penei Sewell instead of Jamar Chase at 5, the Chargers do not end up with Rashawn Slater.
Nope.
No doubt about it.
Not a chance.
Penei Sewell ended up going to Detroit at 7. And then even we were thinking, what the hell was Detroit going to do? We were sitting there at 7 going, both tackles are still on the board. What's going on here?
Well,
So
but again, I remember this was the first part where we were like, come on, Telesco, trade up. This is our guy. Don't do this. Don't do this.
Yep. And then we saw the pick was in for Detroit. It was like, okay, we're not trading up. Penei Sewell goes to Detroit. Okay, so we're sitting there.
It hurt.
More and more picks. So now came the time where we were starting to think about corner. And then Carolina, who a lot of people thought after they traded for Sam Darnold and took care of their quarterback scenario that they were going to secure an offensive tackle for him. And it wasn't an offensive tackle. It wasn't even Patrick Surtain. It was J.C. Horn was the first pick off the board. So there went number 8. And this one I think is actually the biggest one. It may not seem like it. You can make an argument that Cincinnati was the biggest catalyst in all of this. Dallas trading back to 12. Philly jumping up to, where were they at? Denver went Patrick Surtain. We knew they weren't really going to target an offensive lineman. I thought it was going to be Micah Parsons, but the trade that took place.
Well, at that point, Jake, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. At that point, I would say arguably the large majority of Chargers fans, there were 4 guys that were kind of on our wish list at the top. It was the 2 corners and the 2 tackles. Horn, Surtain, Slater, and Sewell. And in a matter of 3 picks, 3 of your 4, 75% of your options are now gone. That was a low point for me. After the Surtain pick, I'm like, oh, here we go. Granted, there were a lot of guys that were available, but still, at that point, I think you and I both were like, okay, got to brace for it.
Yeah. So when Philly leapfrog, this was such a weird thing to see an interdivision trade and it all affecting 3 out of the 4 teams of the NFC West, or the East. Sorry, getting my divisions confused. Philly jumping up to then take Devontae Smith at 10. Dallas moving back 2 spots. I personally thought once J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain were off the board, I thought it was going to be between Micah Parsons and Rashawn Slater because Dallas could have used Easer for Dallas.
Oh, okay. Yep. But then we're not talking about Chicago trading up to get their quarterback.
No, but so when New York's now on the clock, and then I'm thinking to myself, okay, Philly leapfrogged New York because New York was obviously, we know in hindsight from what they ultimately ended up trading back and selecting that they were targeting a wide receiver. So I do believe that Devontae Smith was their target at 11. But if you told me that they were off the board and New York stayed there, you could have also made the argument that Rashawn Slater could have been their pick for an offensive lineman. And it wasn't. And when Chicago traded up at that point in time, I thought to myself, this has to be Micah Parsons for Dallas. There's no question that this would be dumb for them to pass it up.
Perfect fit for them.
And luckily for them, they chose the right guy. And by hook or by crook, somehow Rashawn Slater is there on the board. Now, I'm going to admit, and this was palpable throughout the draft party, Dan, that
I can attest to how Jake was feeling at this very moment.
Even though Rashawn Slater was on the board, I could tell you that my confidence level in the Chargers selecting him was pretty low. Pretty low.
What would you put it at?
I probably would have put it at 10%. 10%. And I say that just because we've seen it before. I didn't want this to be in a type of scenario where, where is the value that Telesco and Brandon Staley going to look at? Are they going to look for the traditional tackle and the Christian Darrisaw type of mold, or are they going to look at the versatile, highly productive, long-term option for your team that is truly going to be the better prospect, arguably the best offensive tackle prospect that some people had in this class? So I couldn't fully trust the organization to make the right choice, even when it was sitting in front of them in a silver platter. And not gonna lie, I even did a quick cross, closed my eyes, and just listened to Goodell say the name.
Oh yeah, I literally, Jake, was on my knees praying. You saw it.
Yeah.
I think the entire room was. And again, like we were thinking, okay, that's there. They could go Elijah Vera Tucker. They can go Darrisaw. They could, dig at the Raiders. Could go Alex Leatherwood. Or they go a completely different scenario. They go Kwity Paye. They could go Jalen. Like there were so many scenarios. All of Chargers Nation is like, please do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And everyone braced with their eyes closed, fingers crossed. And then you hear it.
Rashawn Slater falling to the Chargers at 13, whether you want to call it in the same ballpark or not, but I definitely put it in the same conversation as what I felt when Derwin James fell to us at 17.
Oh, 100%.
It was a mirror image of that. It was how did this happen? And it's the number one position of need and arguably the best at his position in this draft class, and he's still there. And the Chargers did it. They pulled the trigger. They got their gift.
Mm-hmm. And it was kind of interesting because it was a little bit of a roller coaster too, because when the Niners went Trey Lance instead of Mac Jones, that was the first kind of negative domino to fall, where I was like, if that was going to be Mac Jones, somebody definitely be trading up for Trey Lance. Somebody would definitely be trading up for Justin Fields. But that one kind of pushed Mac Jones down a bit. And historically, when people were talking about this draft class, Chargers needed to have 5 quarterbacks taken before us in order for us to get one of those guys. Only 4 were taken. Mm-hmm. And so you're thinking, this isn't a good one. We're not in a good spot. But thankfully, the 2 guys that made the difference in terms of who was actually picked and when, Devonta Smith and Micah Parsons. If those 2 guys were not taken ahead of us, we are not picking Rashawn Slater.
I would add in Chicago trading up with New York at 11 as well.
True. Very true.
I would honestly think if New York didn't receive the right package, if they didn't trade out of there, I probably would have thought that they would have settled for Rashawn Slater there if that was not their guy.
All 3 of those things had to have happened for us to even had a chance at this. So, I mean, realistically, Jake, I would put it at, 3% likelihood that what happened could have actually happened for the Chargers anyways, to get Slater. And it happened. And we've talked about Slater in depth. We're not going to go into all of his characteristics because we know how great he is and how excited this fan base is. Chargers go through the rest of round 1. Chargers do not trade up into the first round, which a lot of people, including myself, were hoping for certain players, but they didn't. They stayed put. Beautiful. And now we're thinking, is this going to work? Like, we got to go corner. Although there's a couple unicorns that were out there. Can someone fall to us at 47?
It was wild, dude. It was wild. Well, there was a lot of celebrating before I went to bed on Thursday night. The good stuff came out. If you were a Chargers fan, you should have been opening up the good stuff. Pour yourself a glass of the brown and celebrate. Needless to say, I wasn't feeling too good the next morning, but I had to get that out of my system quick. But yeah, coming back in the morning, I knew that there was going to be this run on cornerbacks. I knew it. And sure enough, with the first pick in the second round, Jacksonville takes Tyson Campbell. And I'm like, oh my God, immediately, like, here we go. First pick off the board, and it's one of those. So it compounds it even more, even as the picks are getting closer to the Chargers selection. And what did we have? We had Denver taking a running back. I believe did we have a quarterback that went before us in round 1? I couldn't remember the exact order that ended up taking place.
Quarterback after us was Mac Jones in round 1.
Oh, no, I meant in round 2.
No quarterback went ahead of us in round 2.
I mean, this is bonkers, man. Okay, I mean, here's actually what it went. It went Tyson Campbell, Elijah Moore, Javonte Williams was selected by Denver at 35. Then Javon Holland.
At that point, I was ecstatic when Javon Holland went, because I was like, okay, right. All right, we got Moore, right. We got Richie Grant still, feeling good.
Then Landon Dickerson ended up going to Philadelphia at 37. Christian Barrymore to the New England Patriots, which, by the way, is a great pick, great value for them at 38. Tevin Jenkins, who we were very surprised was still on the board after round 1, ended up going to Chicago in round 2. I believe they traded up for that one as well.
So that means you get Tevin Jenkins and Justin Fields.
That's a great draft for them. You could, for Chicago, traditionally, you could just shut the door and not look anything beyond that and say you had a great day. Dan was extremely pissed off when he heard Richie Grant's name go to the Atlanta Falcons at 40th overall. And then, of course, Liam Eichenberg went off the board to the Miami Dolphins at 42. Trayvon Moehrig went to the Raiders. The Raiders just had a bizarre draft, absolutely bizarre draft. Literally, you take their first and their second round picks and you flip them, and that actually makes sense. Trayvon Moehrig and Alex Leatherwood, if you flipped both of those picks for their rounds, that's what should have made sense. Then Kelvin Joseph went to Dallas at 40.
That was a shocker. A shocker.
Then you had Walker Little to the Jacksonville Jaguars. You had Jackson Carman to the Cincinnati Bengals. And then there it was. Asante Samuel Jr. was still on the board at 47.
And we're watching this. I remember when 12 happened and then when Kelvin Joseph, I'm like, no way. There's no way. And then I'm thinking, like, I don't think Jacksonville is going to be going corner. That doesn't make sense. And there's no way that the Bengals are going to go anything other than offensive line, considering they went wide receiver in round 1. I was like, is this actually happening? I'm like, is this real life? And I think all of us were thinking this. We're like, Jake, I can't think of a guy that had more hype around the 47th pick desire for the Chargers than Asante Samuel. Is there anyone else you could think of that the Chargers fans wanted more than this guy in round 2?
No, to them it was Asante Samuel or bust at second round.
Asante Samuel and the Chargers on the board, on the clock.
Then here comes that old familiar feeling that it was on Thursday night, where it's like, guys, please, just, it's there. It's been gifted to you yet again. Just do the right thing.
Time to bolt up. With the 47th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Chargers select Asante Samuel Jr., DB, Florida State.
And by the way, side note, I have nothing against Hank Bauer, but he damn near gave me a heart attack for the way that he chose to deliver the announcement that Asante Samuel Jr. had been picked by the Chargers, because he decided to take a dramatic pause for effect moment.
Oh yeah, I had my eyes closed, Jake.
Yeah,
my
so did I.
crossed, and I legit thought that your internet service went out.
So yeah, same here. It felt like it was a damn eternity. Like I wanted to slightly slowly open my eyes. Is something wrong? Did we lose the feed? What the hell is going on? No, it was just him being like, I'm going to pose up here for a photo op for the next 10 seconds, and then I'm going to read the name. Meanwhile, you're giving Chargers fans across the country a damn heart attack while they're just sitting there biting their fingernails with their eyes glued to the TV. Then he finally says it. Asante Samuel Jr.
Asante Samuel Jr. is a Los Angeles Charger. What?
So after the pick was made, I actually fell to my knees, not in I was more in disbelief than anything. It wasn't me being thankful or thanking the gods or anything like that. I was more in disbelief. I could not believe what I witnessed in rounds 1 and 2.
And remember, folks, Jake was talking about this pipe dream scenario. There's no way it's happening. Even leading up to the pick, 5 picks previously, there's no way. And it's getting closer and closer and closer. And before the second round even started, we both were talking about, okay, 47, that's our Asante Samuel Jr. It's kind of a pipe dream, no way. And I'm like, And you're like, nope, you were 100% confident it was not happening. There's no way we can get 2 of these scenarios to happen, the same draft.
Hey, Pro Football Focus put out the tweet about 3 weeks before the draft that said, hypothetically, if the Chargers were able to get Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr., they would be in the conversation of having possibly the best offseason of any NFL team. To which I quoted the tweet and I said, yeah, and I would like Mexican pizzas to come back to the Taco Bell menu. That's how little of a chance I got. So after this whole thing took place, I was saying, well, they got to bring the damn Mexican pizzas back now, right? I mean,
you would think. Taco Bell, listen to Jake, please.
Anything's possible. I was even having people haze me before the beginning of the second round. People were calling out Dan and myself saying, Dan Wolkenstein is going to do cartwheels when we end up taking Asante Samuel Jr. today because Jake Hefner said it was nothing but a fantasy. And I said, hey, I'm like a Lannister. I pay my debts, and I'm happy to admit when I am wrong. And this is one of those times. I'm still in disbelief about it. I still can't believe that it actually ended up playing out the way that it happened. And the fact that both of these guys are on this team right now is nothing short of a miracle. It really isn't, because a lot of things had to take place in order for these guys to be right there. So I will gladly. For folks that have
not gotten to seen it, go on Twitter. Go on to, I think it's mine or yours. I forget whose it is on our handle. Check out the video of Jake immediately following this pick. You'll see exactly what we're talking about.
Dumbfounded look on my face. Dumbfounded look on my face. I couldn't believe it. Said I was sorry for those of you that have believed in this scenario from the get-go. Congratulations to you. You guys are the true winners here. And I said, holy shit, and I'm out. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. It was a crazy atmosphere. It really was. And wow.
So we're feeling, at this point, we are on a high. We are feeling like we are already in heaven. We are feeling like all of our prayers have been answered. Considering our off season, who's left, who we've actually brought in, and then we fill our 2 biggest needs with our 2 dream scenarios. Wrap it up. Tom Telesco, new man, Brandon Staley's fingerprints all over this. Building the trenches, got our dude for the corner. And then things take a little bit of a turn.
Then the head scratching began.
Yep. So after the break, we are going to go into day 2, round 3. And how the roller coaster of emotions continued on throughout the weekend. Chargers Unleashed when we come back.
Got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising on just you.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
I'm stepping into fate. There is no time to waste.
Welcome back to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Dan, we're now about to jump into the head-scratcher picks, the ones that raised a few questions, had us digging a little bit on our phones, trying to find some additional information about certain guys. But before this, I just wanted to just talk to you, just side tangent just for me. The atmosphere that we had at the draft party, as I'm sure a lot of people had at their own draft parties, seeing people there in Cleveland, you know, virtual draft was still amazing for what they were able to pull off in a short period of time last year, but just it was missing that atmosphere. It was missing that reaction from the crowd when you'd hear first round picks named off. I sure as hell missed having people around to either cheer with or laugh at, depending on who they ended up taking.
Saw that.
And it was just amazing. And we were actually very fortunate that a lot of our big supply of libations that we got a chance to indulge in for the party was supplied by Brewery X in Anaheim. If you guys have not been to Brewery X, I highly recommend it. Tremendous brewery with a lot of different options that they create. Pale ales. My personal favorite was the Slap and Tickle. I know Dan. I know. Great name. Dan had his personal favorite. Dan, what was the one that you ended up having a few of?
Oh man, I think it was a Dictionary Roulette. It was a hazy IPA. That was the first beer I had when I got there, and man, I was hooked. I think I had that twice.
Yeah, it was good. And then outside of the beer selections, they actually have a good selection of seltzer options that come in a variety of different flavors. I think that we ended up having ones that were 5% proof, and then there was ones that were 10%. Oof. And so
I know that.
I mean, you know, I lost track about how many I had and what order I had them in. I think it was like maybe around pick 25, because that was when we brought out, you know, the good stuff of the liquor. But yeah, guys, definitely wanted to send a special thank you to Brewery X. If you guys are around the Anaheim area or you're looking for a brewery, you know, when you come up to, you know, taking a road trip for the weekend, or if you're, you know, if you just so happen to be in the area, would highly recommend Brewery X. Go out and check them out and enjoy a cold one or a couple cold ones. You're not going to regret it, I promise. So now I think this is the part of the draft where we actually started cracking open a couple more beers because we were asking questions. And one thing that I have figured out, even in hindsight after day 3, is that the picks that we're about to explain, because I know that a lot of people were questioning some, especially these next two that we're about to talk about. The biggest thing, and I had even forgotten that Tom Telesco had said this. I think it was probably the week before the draft, or maybe it was the Tuesday right before draft day. And I've now heard him say it twice within the last week or so. But when people ask him questions about positions of need, he retorts back with saying, well, we don't draft based on need. We draft based on players. And I think that was one of the things that myself, I know Dan did, and I'm sure a lot of people did, where you kind of just get pigeonholed into that. Because after the high that we come off of in getting Rashawn Slater and getting Asante Samuel Jr., I mean, that's really a twofer. You're getting two of the best guys at their respective positions, but it's also a position of need. So you were really playing that BPA and need card at the same time with both of those guys. So then automatically your brain goes, okay, what's the next biggest hole on the roster to fill? We were looking at safety position. We were looking at, what else were we looking at, Dan, at that round in round
edge,
3?
Potentially.
We were looking at edge rushers in that round.
Double dip in the corner. We can go offensive line in the guard
scenario.
Offensive
line again. Yeah, there was plenty of different options that you were looking at just based off need. So the two next positions that were taken were arguably two of the deepest positions that you currently have on the roster already. So let's talk about the first one. Let's talk about Josh Palmer, wide receiver out of Tennessee. Now, when we started seeing the wide receivers come off the board, even the wide receivers that still so happened to be on the board by the time that the Chargers ended up using their third round pick, I'll admit I was a bit surprised by it. Dan, you were a bit surprised by it.
Mm-hmm.
Was it more the player, the position, or both that got you?
I think it was probably more the player at the position is what got me. You were talking about De'Ami Brown, who was still available.
Yep.
Amari Rogers was picked shortly afterwards. Nico Collins was still there. Anthony Schwartz would have been a fun pick. So there's a lot of guys on the board that were like, oh, interesting. Not saying it was a bad pick at all. I just was not expecting that.
Here's where it really got into question. Do you know that when round 3 started, from pick 65 to come down to the Chargers pick at 76, or excuse me, 77. There were no wide receivers taken before the Chargers took one. Josh Palmer was the first wide receiver taken in the 3rd round.
How many Chargers fans would you say knew who Josh Palmer was before his name was picked?
I'm sure a lot of people did their homework. I think that, it could be very easy to overlook a receiver like Josh Palmer based off of the stats. But when you really dig into it, you understand that it was strictly just about poor quarterback play. I mean, and he was ranked, I saw from Pro Football Network, he was ranked as a 4th or a 5th round projection. Everybody's got their own different projections. Everybody's got these guys different, ranked differently. One of our colleagues, Steve Hagelin, had him as one of his sleeper prospects of the draft. So I know he was completely stoked about it. But just looking into this, we knew from day one before the draft started that if you were looking for a wide receivers 3 or one of those quintessential slot receivers, this draft was littered with them. You could find one of those guys in any round of this draft. But when you start digging a little bit deeper here, you start connecting a little bit of the dots. And obviously you get past the lack of production based off of poor quarterback play at Tennessee. But you look at what this guy did to some of the premier cornerbacks in this draft, and Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn. He was able to get the better of them in the games that he played this season. You go all the way back to 2018, I believe Palmer was averaging, just over 20 yards per catch. That was back in 2018. And then, of course, the last 2 years, unfortunately, has cycled in bad quarterback play for him, so his numbers dipped. It was 21 yards per catch average as a sophomore. So I don't think it was so much him that was the issue, because he's got good size for him. His hands, if you've watched his highlights, his hands are fantastic. Pay attention to his route running, ladies and gentlemen. He is not strictly just a downhill type of guy. He breaks and he makes people look silly as he leaves them in the dust. So the biggest thing I took away with this is that I'm looking at the size of Josh Palmer. I'm looking at what people are saying as far as when they're using the term 50-50 ball with Josh Palmer, can jump up, can go and get it. Sounds a little bit familiar with the current wide receiver that we have on the roster in Mike Williams. You invest in a guy like this that's more of your X type of wide receiver and not so much a slot guy, which again can be had a dime a dozen in this draft. They go outside of the box for the type of wide receivers that's not the norm for this draft. That's not the populace in this draft. and they pick a bigger-bodied guy who's an X-receiver, who's a high jumper. Is he the fastest guy on the field? Hell no. But to me, investing your first third-round pick in this type of wide receiver that does essentially has the similar skill set to Mike Williams, this to me felt like a similar shot across the bow when the Chargers traded up to take Kenneth Murray last year, that was the indicator that Denzel Perryman was not going to return in 2021. That's what this feels like to me.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, they're probably going to have to pay Mike Williams somewhere like 18 to 20 million next year, or they can have a rookie contract and pay, I forget what it is, 3.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Hey, and even if I'm wrong on this competition for Josh Palmer will probably start when you're looking between the likes of him and coming in and battling against Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson for a roster spot. I personally don't know what they're going to do at this point with Joe Reed and KJ Hill. I cannot put my finger on it, especially with Brandon Staley and Joe Lombardi now running the offense. I really don't know what's going to end up taking place there.
Brandon Staley was talking to him, and he basically was talking about the tape he was watching. He said, I'm watching all these elite corners that we might be drafting, and I keep seeing this kid beating them. And I'm thinking, man, I want that guy on my team. In the SEC, for you to be able to beat the competition the way he did with a crap quarterback, and you were nice when you were talking about the quarterback play, that says something. Josh Palmer is a fun guy to watch. I think he's going to have a very quick impact on this team, and I think it's going to cause a little bit of ripple effect with long-term what happens with this wide receiver group.
You think any of it had to deal with the fact that one of the cornerbacks that he got the better of in the SEC just so happened to go to one of your division rivals in Denver with their first-round pick?
Good call. Good call. Roasted Patrick Surtain for like a 30-something yard touchdown.
Could be. Possibly. Maybe.
And actually, he roasted him for a few catches in that game.
So, yeah, did that make us still scratch our heads a little bit? Yes. So we're like, okay, on to the next one. We're still watching the way that the board is falling. We were even looking at, okay, it was between safety and edge. This one gave me the worst feeling that arguably I've ever had in the draft. Not so much because of who the Chargers took, it's because of the players that were taken around the Chargers immediately after, before and after. Because at 96, I love it when New England picks right before us. I absolutely love it. They just always seem to do this to me. You're still looking on the board, and somehow or another in the middle of the third round, Ronnie Perkins is still on the board. And New England takes Ronnie Perkins right before you. So, yeah, that hurt, but you still had a lot of good safety or edge talent that could have came off the board right here.
Guys that are still available at the time the Chargers picked here. Quinn Meinerz was picked directly after we picked.
Yes.
Elijah Molden, Melifonwu, both corners, which we loved, were picked within 5 slots of us. I mean, like right afterwards, there were probably 10 players that were picked where half of them were guys that we were thinking, oh, this would be great. This would be great.
Yep.
A ton of edge, ton of corners, ton of safeties were still there. And instead, we go tight end. Jake, when you heard the name Trey McKitty, what was your immediate reaction? Don't hold back.
My immediate reaction is that someone gave Telesco the full power back in the third round, because it seemed like okay, we're gonna do this again. Or nobody changes it up the way Tom Telesco does between rounds 1, 2, and 3. Once we get to that third round mark, seriously, hold your damn breath, because it's going to be something that you're not expecting. And it was proven again. Again, this is not a knock on Trey McKitty. This is us being a prisoner of the moment and falling into what the remaining needs are. And again, our board, even me and Dan's board, doesn't look the same. Nobody's big board for how we have ranked any players looks the same. And ultimately, none of our boards look the same as they are in the Chargers war room. So I had a tough time thinking that Trey McKitty was the best player on the board. I personally believe that if Ronnie Perkins was not selected right before us, that would have been the pick. I still believe that.
Yep. And as soon after, Jake and I, you and I both, and a couple of the friends that we were there with, were looking to see, okay, what the hell? And it was pretty quick that we were able to kind of understand the rationale behind it, and then we learned more as we heard from Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley. The one component of our offense that was glaringly missing, other than that burner wide receiver, was we had nobody who could run block as a tight end.
Nope.
Not a single one. I think the Chargers got the best run blocking tight end on the board. Could it have been a bit of a reach? Maybe, but they got the guy they needed. And they also got the guy who was not utilized nearly as much as he could have been. And I would put money on it. He is going to be a far better NFL player in terms of production than one in college.
I'm interested to see what he's going to do. Yes, your tight end room as it looks right now, not including Trey McKitty, is Jared Cook, Donald Parham, and Steven Anderson. So to me, right off the bat, I thought, okay, if I didn't put it out of the possibility that they were going to draft a tight end in this draft, not at all. I just didn't expect them taking one that high, and especially given who was still on the board. But yes, to your point, Dan, as far as his blocking skills goes, that's where he excels. But he is still a well-rounded tight end that was basically underutilized during his time at Georgia. So in terms of what he's got, as you check the marks as far as the size and the possible growth potential for what you've seen, even in a limited window for what he's done from a receiving standpoint, you could check the boxes there. Obviously, he's going to need time to develop. But if you're telling me that this could be someone who you're bringing in as a fourth tight end right now, you possibly can beat out Steven Anderson for a roster spot come September. And then you look a little bit further down the line that if Donald Parham is indeed going to end up one day being your tight end one, if Jared Cook ends up departing after this one-year deal, which is entirely a possibility considering his age and where he's at in his career, you could possibly be looking at your tight end number 2 come next year.
Mm-hmm. And I remember as soon as we made this pick, in my head, I'm thinking, man, there were some stud safeties that I've been clamoring for. There were some corners still on the board. And we go and draft a tight end 4. Not 4th on the depth chart, but just a 4th tight end. I was just scratching my head. After looking at it, could it have been a bit of a reach? Maybe. But let's say the Chargers don't get him. I know we could say, oh, maybe he's there in round 5 or 4, who knows, whatever. Let's say we don't. Then what? That's a huge weakness. And now you turn that weakness into a strength. We actually have run blocking tight ends who's actually very athletic, who could play out wide, he could play on the line. Not bad. So I think after this point, we had to kind of go back to the drawing board. We had to kind of digest how this happened, why, the rationale. I kind of get it. You wake up in the morning and you're thinking, oh, okay, day 3. Here we go. This is going to be a make or break day for us. And Jake, one of the diamonds was picked by the Los Angeles Chargers.
You want to talk about him after the break?
Ooh, yes, please. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Day 3, Dan Wolkenstein's diamond, quote unquote. Coming up next, Chargers Unleashed.
Let's bring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Welcome back to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. Now we're digging into day three. Day three of the draft, this is where you start rounding out some of your depth, but still, given the fact of what took place in rounds 1 through 3, there was still some really productive talent that was remaining on the board in round 4. And some of the picks here in the initial couple of picks before the Chargers even were on the clock in round 4. Not only were good players, but there were some interesting selections here. So automatically, given what had taken place over the past 2 days, again, you start falling into that mindset of, okay, well, what do the Chargers still need? Where do they need to fill out some of the depth on their roster a little bit more? So again, much like we were thinking in round 3, here's an opportunity still for you to get a productive edge rusher, a productive safety that you could use as a backup for the time being, filling out the depth at that part of your roster. So round four is starting. And then here's where it got heartbreaking for me, at least. Ellerson Smith, who I said, give me life, give me death, give me Ellerson Smith. I'm really interested to see what he's going to do. Unfortunately, he's going to do it as a New York Giant because he was taken 2 picks ahead of the Chargers at pick 116. I was visibly upset, to say the least. For those that witnessed me there, they knew how pissed off I was. But I will say this. There was a nice consolation prize that the Chargers were able to take at pick 118.
With the 118th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Los Angeles Chargers select Chris Rumph, defensive end, Duke.
A player that we have talked about a lot if you listen to our deep dive show on the edge position. And to be perfectly honest, this individual was Dan Wolkenstein's boy. So I'm going to shut up and turn it over to Dan because this is his moment to tell us everything about his excitement when the Chargers selected Chris Rumph, the edge out of Duke.
Jake, I think I sent you the video of
my
wife taking a video of me at that pick. Oh, that was a mood. I was so happy this guy was picked by our team. And when I started this day, I had created my big board of the day 3 guys I wanted the Chargers to get. And Mr. Chris Rumph was number 15 on that board. And damn it, they actually got him. For folks who have not watched Chris Rumph, I'm going to go back and just look at the notes I took for myself when I watched him. And then go into a couple little nuggets that I think you might enjoy. I went through this, Jake. First bullet I had on my list was hidden gem. I said he plays physical, long and thick frame, can rush off the edge and inside, really versatile, high motor, really good technique, good speed to set containment, smart football player, can shoot the gap well, and will be a great fit in hybrid defensive schemes. Then, you kind of fast forward a bit, you go look at NFL.com, Lance Zierlein points him at a NFL comparison to a one Leonard Floyd. And again, for those who don't know who Leonard Floyd is, he was a highly coveted free agent on the Rams who did extremely well under Brandon Staley. Coincidence? I think not. You look at the rating they gave him a 6.31, which says he's going to be a starter within the first 2 seasons. Could get a little more weight, could add maybe 10 pounds or so. This guy is going to be a stud.
One of the things that I really liked when you start looking into Chris Rumph's background is that he comes from great bloodlines. His dad is the current defensive line coach for the Chicago Bears and has actually been a coach for the past 18 seasons. Do you think he's gotten a chance to teach his son a thing or two about rushing the passer? I love this kid. I really do. There's obviously still work to be done, but we said this at the beginning of whether we were talking about just the draft class, possible targets, our deep dive into the edge. You're not going to find the Joey Bosa's in this class. But the Chargers were in a great position given the fact that they had not only Joey Bosa, but former second-round pick in Uchenna Nwosu, who I finally believe is going to get the full crack at having a starting opportunity, and I believe that he's going to make the most of it. And then you went out in free agency and you signed Kyler Fackrell to round out your edge position a little bit more. So really, in reality, the Chargers were looking for, second string, but situational pass rusher. A guy whose sole job is just to go and get the quarterback. And if you're telling me that that's all that Chris Rumph really needs to worry about in his full season, I'm all for it. Go and look at his stats on what he did during his time at Duke.
At one point, people were saying he was going to be the best edge player in the draft. This was before this past season. He's good. He's actually really good. After talking with him, super excited to be learning from Joey Bosa. He mirrors his game after Khalil Mack, and I forget the other one.
Von Miller.
He mirrors it after Von Miller. Yes, please. And coincidence again that both of those guys he mirrors were coached by a one Brandon Staley. Like, it's kind of weird.
I'm just happy that the diamond in the rump tagline that I gave you several weeks ago, we get to use that over and over and over again now.
It lives on. It lives on. Next pick. Now, Jake, at this point, again, no trade ups.
Still looking for that safety.
Still want a safety. And weirdly enough, there's still guys that I had on my big board that I wanted that were still available that were not getting picked. And I am a little disappointed, a little shocked, but it is what it is. We end up going with some desperately needed offensive line depth with Brendan Jaimes. I believe it's how you pronounce his last name.
Spell his name. Jaimes.
Now, he actually, Jake, is a pretty high value pick for this team. I did not think that he would be going in round 5. I think he probably was mocked to go before that. And he could arguably be challenging for a starting spot within the year. Ibushi might be challenged. Who knows? We have no idea what he's going to be here next year. Great talent, great depth. You heard Brandon Staley talk about it before we even got into this, that you win championships in the trenches, and that was his biggest emphasis this past offseason, was to improve the trenches, both offensive line and defensive line.
This was a pick that, this was the one position that I would not have been disappointed if the Chargers were going to double dip on. Obviously, they went out with their first round pick and they got Rashawn Slater. But to come back around, and maybe a lot of people on the surface level did not know who Brendan Jaimes was. Go back and look at his production because it's absolutely ridiculous. Dan talks about this being a value pick. I think that may even be a little bit understated. Just given the fact of his versatility, played right tackle, played left tackle, is still capable of, most likely kicking inside to guard at the next level in the NFL. But go look at this man's starting experience, because it's nuts. Over the 2018, 2019, and 2020 season, he started 32 games. All 32 games. And he set a school record with 40 consecutive starts on the offensive line.
That sounds wonderful, considering what's happened with our offensive line the last 10 years.
So he was the left tackle for 32 out of his 40 starts, which is just nuts. It's nuts. So to have that type of starting experience, again, coming from a college that breeds offensive linemen traditionally, whether they're high picks or they aren't, they normally dominate when it comes to offensive linemen. this is a great value pick for the Chargers. And Dan, I like the fact that you mentioned Ode Abouche because he's just on a 1-year deal. And not saying that Abouche is not going to pan out, but you could be looking at, if we're just talking this year, this could just be simply a depth move with having Brandon Hymes as part of this roster. But if the Chargers decide to not sign Ode Abouche beyond this 1-year contract, strange enough, you may have just found your starting left guard in the 5th round of the NFL draft.
And it's the thing for me, Jake, I think the two things that stood out for me when watching him, feet, hands. Incredibly quick feet. You can see he's really fine-tuned that. And his hands, man, they're always going. I feel like he's always jabbing. It's crazy. Both of those, I think, are his strong suits, and I think that's why he succeeded so well in college. He's going to bring that to the NFL. On to round 6, Jake.
Where's that safety? Where's that safety?
At this point, I think everyone is wondering, what are we missing something? Like, is Jake going to have to go in and play safety if somebody gets hurt? Like, how is this going to work? So we then, speaking of versatility, speaking of guys who could do multiple positions, Nick Niemann out of Iowa is our first pick in the 6th round. And I think a lot of folks were like, who? Why? But then you start to look at kind of his profile and what he does well. He is a great tackler, great on special teams. He's someone who balled out at the Pro Bowl, by the way. I think that's where his name really started to rise. Really good technique. I really like how well he kind of runs sideline to sideline. But I think what he was brought in for was the sure tackling and special teams. Now, should the Chargers be focusing and going with just special teams guys in round 6, the first pick? Sometimes you would say no, but how quickly folks forget how much this special teams absolutely killed us. It was the worst in the league last year, and it wasn't even close. So, sure, please, put some emphasis on that. That's what they did with this pick, in my opinion.
I watched Nick Niemann during all of our college, film breakdown? No, I hadn't. But as Dan mentioned, from the special team standpoint for what Niemann does, that's where you're going to see his value early on. You're starting to crowd up that linebacker room just a little bit, but it's rounding it out. And if you're rounding it out with a guy that kind of under the radar as far as his production goes, but again, the special teams value and what he can do just as far as a backup linebacker, as far as his production goes, this is where the player development aspects of the coaching staff really needs to come into play with these guys. Dan, like you said, are you normally looking for guys that are going to round out your special teams on day 3? It depends. To me, it depends on what round you're talking about. But when you have special teams at in the mold of what the Chargers were in 2020, yeah, you kind of need guys like this, and Nick Niemann fills one of those voids. When I started seeing, and again, I will admit, this far down the line, I didn't put much stock into studying the running backs, A, because I didn't think that was going to be a position that the Chargers were going to draft, and B, because I know it was a weak class. I wanted to spend more of my time focusing on, positions of need that we were going through. So to being perfectly frank, I did not watch any of Larry Roundtree. But when I started seeing the stats that came in, the first thing that jumped out to me was 3,720 rushing yards through his 4 seasons. Immediately, my first thought was that sounded almost eerily similar to the production when Justin Jackson was coming out of, I believe, Northwestern that he was drafted out of, I believe.
Yep.
Because Justin Jackson had 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons out of Northwestern. This type of production seemed eerily similar to me. So if Larry Roundtree is going to earn a job on this roster, obviously number one, it is going to be by special teams. But that to me is the biggest threat to him being on the roster is Justin Jackson. But outside of that, and outside of where he's going to be starting with this team from a special teams standpoint, He was just extremely consistent. And again, this was another guy, and you saw the pattern happening even from round 3 with some of the players that the Chargers were selecting, is that they were taking some of the standouts and the players that really impressed them from Senior Bowl week. Roundtree was no different. Brandon Jaimes that we were just talking about, he performed well during Senior week. I believe McKitty and Josh Palmer also performed well during Senior week. So you started to see a trend, and this was no different with Larry Roundtree. But I really like his size where he's at 5'11", 220. I think he's a tailor-made, third running back in a stable if he can ultimately grow his game to be that good and to earn a spot on this roster. So was it a pick that I was expecting? Position what I was expecting ultimately for the Chargers to take in this draft? No, I wasn't. But I like the production out of this kid. So if you can get beyond just being a special teams contributor, which is where his career is going to start, I'd be excited to see what he could look like in a running back stable with what the Chargers currently have.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a few things that this team's going to use him for. You mentioned kind of the special teams. I think Brandon Staley actually talked about him.
He blocks.
Yep, he's a great blocker. Brandon Staley told him on the phone call before they drafted him that they were going to ask him to do both running and special teams, which he said he's all about. He can cover and return kicks. He is a great blocker. I think one of the things he prides himself on is blitz pickup, which thank the Lord. The thing I like about him is he's very aggressive. He always falls forward. Very has a kind of a mean streak. I really actually like him. I don't necessarily know how much he's going to be used in the running back stable other than potentially like a flex or maybe like a goal line situation. Because I actually really like Joshua Kelly and obviously Eckler, and I don't know what's going to happen with Justin Jackson. All three of them I think I like more than him, but he brings something they don't, which is that kind of that bully mentality.
Yeah. So again, the first thing I took away, and I think Telesco did touch on this because you mentioned the ability to kick and return punts. I think that Telesco said that they do not see him as the returner type, but if you're going to block or to open up holes, they said that's where the start of his career is going to be. But interesting selection for them. Obviously, the Chargers had a trend that they were looking for in the draft, and as I mentioned earlier, they weren't drafting by position, they were drafting by players. So when you see someone that is versatile, special teams contributor, and highly productive at their own position, that's a pretty good pick.
Jake, we have made it to the 7th round. At this point, I think we are both, I know we weren't there live, we were kind of watching on our phones, we were both doing stuff.
I finally said we're not taking a safety now.
Nope, I gave up hope.
I finally gave up, yep.
I gave up hope. I expected Jake to be going in at some point in the season. And to be honest, I think I was just mentally exhausted before we even got to our 7th round pick. And then what do you know with the 7th round pick, we go with a safety, Mark Webb out of Georgia. Jake, what do you know about Mark Webb?
Mark Webb was in one of the most talented defensive back units, not just of last year, but over the last couple years.
How many guys got drafted in Georgia this year in the secondary?
I think there was 5 that ended up getting drafted by them. I mean, talk about being in a room full of just dogs. The versatility that Mark Webb brings, I'm very interested to see where they're going to put him, because Tom Telesco has said that he sees him, as a bigger nickel cornerback, but he can also play, the single high safety. So, I mean, he can be in a variety of different spots, in my opinion. I think there are some things just off the top that may limit him to his positions as far as where they want him, which is, I think, why they figure. I mean, it's more of the speed than anything is why they probably think that he's more limited to being that bigger nickel cornerback. But still, look at Mark Webb's production. It's ridiculous for someone that unfortunately just doesn't have the biggest athletic traits that you want to still log stats like this.
And he used to be a receiver, by the way.
Used to be a receiver. So even in a truncated year in 2020, 21 tackles, 1 interception, 2 pass breakups. The year prior is really where I thought that people were going to have him on the map because he was more productive in 2019. 46 tackles, 3 for a loss, 3 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles. Who was it? He himself actually described himself as quote unquote Mr. Everything after he was selected. So, and a little fun fact, Mark Webb and Nasir Adderley, I forget where it was that they have their connection going back to college, but they apparently know each other very, very well. So how about some familiarity now in that secondary group?
Yep. Yeah, I think he's one of those players. You mentioned kind of the weaknesses. The speed isn't there. You don't want people getting behind him. I think he plays better downhill. I think he's kind of one of those, again, a versatile player, can play multiple positions. I was just happy we got a safety. I didn't care which one, to be honest. I was just like, please.
It got to that point, I think, from pick 185 where we were just waiting. Is this going to be Ardarius Washington? And it wasn't. Is it going to be Hamza Nasruddin? And it wasn't.
Yep.
And we had to wait. But then Mark Webb was the pick.
Taking a breath. And you kind of look at the overall, and again, there's still free agency left. So there's still some things to be done. Although you can argue the Chargers don't need anything else. Can we talk about, Jake, in one offseason, through the draft and free agency so far, what the overhaul of this team has been? Like, they completely, other than one offensive lineman, completely revamped their offensive line and turned it from a glaring weakness to arguably one of their strengths. They changed out the tight end group, brought in some receivers. Safeties are different. Got a stud corner. Got probably the best offensive lineman they could have hoped for. And got a ton of depth everywhere else in one offseason. And oh, by the way, they also completely overhauled their entire coaching staff. I legitimately cannot think of another time on any team that there has been this much change to the organization top to bottom than what we have witnessed with the 2021 Los Angeles Chargers.
I would say mission accomplished. I really would. It's been impressive to watch what the Chargers did, but I think it was more gratifying than anything else to, and even Tom Telesco said this after his press conference yesterday when people were asking him questions about just kind of like what you said, Dan, is like, they asked Tom, did you believe that, you were going to be, or no, how did they phrase it? He said, did you believe that revamping the offensive line like this was the best thing to do given the fact that you were getting a new coaching staff on top of it? And Tom admitted, he said, I actually believed for us to fully revamp our offensive line was going to be a 1 to 2 year project. So I don't think that he even expected things to work out as well as they did in one season. But like you said, Dan, it's not just the free agents that the Chargers ended up getting, and of course the draft picks and filling out this roster and getting them ready for this upcoming NFL season. But yeah, taking on the overhaul that was the coaching staff on top of it is truly incredible, because now you're dealing with so many different minds that you have not been used to over the past 4 years. It's new for Tom Telesco. It's new for Brandon Staley. It's new for every single person that is in that coaching and scouting room. And it's now getting everyone together, putting your collective minds together and say, how are we going to build out this team? What's the best way that we're going to do that? Because it's easy for us as bystanders to say, well, this is simple. We know what the number one priority is. Protect your franchise. And Dan, you and I were even on here after the season was over. And even you and I did not think that we were going to revamp 4 out of the 5 starters from last year to this year. I figured there was going to be at least 2. Had to be at least 2. The left tackle spot obviously had to go. And then I knew once we were getting rid of,
Trey Turner.
Thank you. After Turner was getting let go, I knew that spot we had to fill that as well. And I thought, given the lack of big production from Dan Feeney and Forrest Lamp, that maybe you re-sign them on low-end one-year deals just to see what they do. I did not expect there to be 4 different starters to this team. You get 3 in free agency, 1 in the draft. It's just amazing. But it's also a great feeling to know that, if you're a fan, to think that they had the same thing in mind as all of us did, to protect your quarterback, who was harassed all season long and took several hits last year and still ended up getting the Rookie of the Year.
Week 17, rewind for a sec. We just won our 4th game in a row.
Yo, your curse.
My curse. I apologize.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At that moment, again, at that moment, before we go with the coaching changes, before we go with the free agency, before we go with the draft, at that moment, how optimistic were you about this offseason?
Not a lot. Not a lot. Obviously, it took us a long time to get from, Black Monday, from the coaching changes, to where we are today. And you go back to Black Monday, prior to the news of the Chargers now overhauling their coaching staff, I didn't feel too optimistic about it, because one, I felt that there was a good chance that Anthony Lynn was going to remain the head coach of this team. You know how down I was about that.
Yep. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because that feels like it was a decade ago already. With Anthony Lynn and how terrible the offensive line was, and Trey Turner's contract, and Casey Hayward, and Derwin James is not healthy, and Drew Tranquil's out. Who's our coach? What are we going to do in the draft? Are we going to get any free agents? So many huge gray clouds and question marks were going on for the past 5 months, and arguably the past 12 months, if you want to be honest. And now, sitting here, the day after the draft ends, you said it, Jake. Mission accomplished. For folks who are going to sit here today and find reasons to bitch about Tom Telesco, at this point, there is nothing that this team can do to satisfy you. Just accept it. Say what you will about some of the puzzling selections in the draft. It is what it is. By the time you get to round 4 through 7, it's kind of a crapshoot, and you hope that at some point they'll start. That's really the goal.
Very few times in Charger history do the football gods smile upon this team. Seriously. And that's why I tweeted what I said with, we're not big proponents of PFF on this podcast, but when they put out that tweet saying, if you kind of even just summed it up right there, Dan, if the Chargers were able to get Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr., they would have arguably the best offseason of any team in the NFL. And that's what really you have to go back to. You have to go back to Black Monday and go through everything that this team has gone through, whether it's filling out the coaching staff, free agency, replacing this offensive line, and now the cherry on top is in the first 2 days of the draft. You get 2 of the best players at their position. And on top of that was your 2 biggest needs that you needed to fill out the roster. I can't stress. Yeah, mission accomplished. I can't stress that enough. It truly is amazing. And it's not all by skill that this happened. There was definitely some luck that had to have taken place in these scenarios going all the way back to February. But they did it. And what a hell of an offseason it was. Now comes the work. Because now Dan and I are going to fall into that old familiar saying on paper. On paper, the Chargers have this. On paper, the Chargers have that. And that's not going to mean a damn thing until maybe middle October, when we know what this team looks like under a new head coach with these new players in these positions. Give them a couple games under their belt and see, yeah, this is a different team.
Jake, we did it. We got through 7 rounds, didn't trade anything away, got some studs, made it through the anxiety of the entire weekend. And we're here to live to talk about it, crack open a cold one with our friends, our family.
I'm going to go have another slap and tickle.
Yes, please.
I got one more.
Whoa, hey-o, I don't know where you're going with this, Jake.
Slap and Tickle IPA.
There you go.
Finish it off. Slap and Tickle IPA.
Jake, how do you want to take us home with this? I know we've been talking for 7 hours at this point.
Yeah, nobody should have to listen to us more than 30 minutes. Otherwise, they probably want to change the station. But no, it's been a wild ride through all this draft stuff. I'm glad we finally got through it. Now we're able to look toward the OTAs to, if they actually end up happening, but to the mini camps and the rest of this stuff. But we're going to still be talking, the work on filling out this roster is not done. You know this, Dan, because as we get closer and closer to preseasons, there's still, even right now, there's other free agents that haven't even been signed. I can think of a couple right now, just in case. But as we get closer to preseason, through the preseason, then when the surprise cuts end up happening, the work is not done, my friend. It may be just, like a dormant volcano right now for the next month or two, but it's not done. And over these next couple of months, we're just going to evaluate this roster where it's going to be, obviously take a little bit deeper into these draft picks, take a little bit further look into some of the undrafted free agent guys that we got. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun offseason, and Chargers fans should be hyped for what this team and this organization has accomplished over the last 3 months. It's good. It's good, and I think the arrow is pointing in the right direction, so get excited. And continue to follow the show on @LAC_Unleashed, myself @GT Hefner, and of course Dan Wolkenstein @Chargers Homer. Thank you guys again so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Chargers Unleashed.